Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Finstep Asia Edge podcast, where we bring you news and thought leaders from the fintech and the virtual assets world, Web3 as it were. Today, we have a very interesting guest with us, Mr. Jeff Greenfield, who is the co founder and CEO of Provalytics. We're going to be doing something different, not just talking about the industry in terms of financial services or virtual assets, but looking at the other end where we will discuss about marketing analytics and what else uh, fintechs and those firms involved in the Web3 world can utilize to improve their business metrics, but also a newer way of engaging in this digital first world. Jeff, welcome to our podcast vlog, as it were. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here today.
We're delighted to have you. You're based in the U.S. East Coast, up early to speak to us, 7 a.m. there for you. So really appreciate that, and very nice to connect with you.
It's a pleasure. It's exciting to see how the fintech space is starting to make changes, but still suffering with the same issues that most companies are dealing with in the marketing and advertising space.
True that, like at the end of it, as fintech matures and becomes a integral part of financial services, I go as far as saying fintech is dead now because it's BAU for financial services.
Yeah.
Before we step into a conversation around the themes of the analytics and fintech itself, would love to have our audience understand your entrepreneurial journey. So if you could share with us how your career has evolved and what drew you to co-founding Provalytics, it would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a non-linear journey, or if you will, especially in terms of trying to solve problems. That seems to be kind of the continual line, is that as I see problems, I end up solving them, and that kind of evolves into a business. But in the early 2000s, I was in the branded entertainment product placement space, where I would put products and services on TV and film. So you would see sunglasses in a movie. That was my company that did that.
Okay.
Had a client who I became very friendly with, who was doing a lot in the digital marketing space. And he didn't understand the numbers. The numbers didn't quite make sense to him. And he asked if I could check them out. I took a look at them, and then the numbers didn't seem to make sense. It was kind of a situation where for every sale that was happening, there was what we would say 5 mothers or fathers, because all of the different ad networks were claiming credit. This is in the very early days of digital marketing. And so I thought, well, I can build out a solution for this. And that became the genesis of this platform called C3 Metrics, which was one of the first enterprise multi-touch attribution platforms. And it leveraged big data, hundreds of billions of data points every single day being collected, to then use machine learning to figure out what was working and what wasn't working in terms of a marketer's advertising spend. So a marketer could use this data to figure out how to take the same budget that they had and squeeze out 20, 30, sometimes 40% more sales, just under the idea that half the money they were spending was being wasted. The problem was they didn't know which half, but we were able to figure that out. Scaled up that company, exited in 2019 before the COVID, and figured I was done with measurement. After 12 years, I was all set with it. And then all of a sudden, there started to be this combination of changes that occurred throughout the world, all relating to privacy, that was destroying what I had created. Because what I had created was leveraging this big data, leveraging the connection of user IDs across mobile, across first-party, third-party cookies, unique identifiers. And all of the privacy changes worldwide are all about you can't track users anymore. And so a couple of years ago, when I saw what was happening, I said, I have to get back into this space. There's a need now to be able to look at the same information, but to do it from a different perspective, one that doesn't utilize any user data, but also provides the same type of output to marketers. And that led to the growth and the birth of Provalytics.
Okay. And how's that progress been, especially given COVID wasn't the easiest of times to launch a company, right? We started just before COVID and we were pivoting around to survive. But, albeit that this was an important phase, it's still very challenging to start in an environment where the economics aren't great and in fact terrible, right? So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, the hardest thing for me was that the muscles that you use in the beginning of a startup are completely different than the end of a startup. And so
Hmm.
it had been 14 years since I had started up a company, and I had I had my doubts. I wasn't sure I could do it again. But my wife encouraged me and said, "Hey, it's like riding a bicycle. Once you get
Sure.
back on, and plus, since I was in the same space, I knew all the players, so it was just a matter of you talking to folks and getting a good picture of what their challenges were before I started building things out. So it was challenging economically, but I think the biggest challenge was for me in my own head and just overcoming that. And once I did that, then I was kind of on a roll at that point.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So how has this field evolved? You mentioned about the changes as such, but how has that? How do you feel that has impacted our universe in the fintech and the Web3 world as compared to others, or just as a status quo? What do you think has changed for mobile first, digital first fintech and Web3 firms?
Well, the biggest shift has been that, since the birth of digital marketing,
Hmm.
all of us in the space of acquisition, when we're trying to acquire new customers, it's all been about targeting. So you
Yeah,
figure out who your target market is, and then you go to your different publishers, um, and you start to go in and say, okay, I want to buy this segment, very specific. And the more specific you get, it was that you would get your very specific acquisition targets, which was perfect. Well, we're now living in this world where you can't target like that anymore. You just can't do it. The only way you're actually going to know who someone is once they authenticate and they become a customer of yours. But prior to that, you're not going to know that. But it used to be you didn't know who they were, but you could pretty much know everything about them. And that was the best thing about it. So now we're living in this world where we're almost back to how things were before digital. Because before digital, all we had was TV, radio, and print and billboards
yeah,
out of home. And we used to target based on where somebody lived, their geography, and then their broad demographic. And that's pretty much where we are now. And so what we did is when we started building out Provalytics, we started looking ahead. We saw this is what was going to be coming. And we said, well, what did marketers do? What did we do back in those days before digital? How
sure.
was Pepsi? How was Nokia? How were these brands able to scale? And how were they able to measure effectiveness of their global advertising campaigns? And they used a technique called marketing mix modeling, which is essentially a lot of math and statistical modeling techniques, which most marketers today hate because when they hear marketing mix
Yeah,
model, they hear project, they hear a lot of data collection, and they hear
yeah,
it's going to take 9 months to get it back, and it's not going to be useful to me because it's 9 months old.
yeah.
And but the math behind it was the key. So we borrowed some of that math and combined it with what marketers loved about multi-touch attribution, which was the speed to insights, being able to see what was actually happening as soon as it happened, and then also be able to forecast ahead. And we combined those two and created Provalytics. So we're kind of in the middle.
Okay.
But the focus is that you have to measure at the same level where you target. That's really the key. You can't be at a user level in measurement, but you're targeting at this kind of demographic level. And so what it
Level.
means for fintech and financial service firms is that you're still going to be able to market to your known customers the same way that you have always been because you know who they are. You know their address, you know their financial standings, they know what assets you have of theirs under management. It's the acquisition side of things that is significantly changing because you're going to have to focus more on less targeting and more branding, which is a scary thing for a lot of firms because branding typically meant you could not connect branding dollars to actual real dollars in the bank. But utilizing these techniques at Provalytics, we can connect branding to sales. And so that's the big shift, is that we've had to pan back the camera both in terms of measurement and in terms of targeting.
So pulling back just a little bit, for the members of the audience who may not be quite aware, why is this change happen? What has been the drivers? Could you just elaborate a little bit more on what's led to needing to go back to, this is the right choice with Pepsi? Yeah.
Yeah. So what's led to kind of all of these changes started in the EU with the GDPR, which were the privacy requirements that essentially said to ad technology companies, you have this list of people that you've created all of these profiles on, and as of this date, you need to get rid of that list, and you now have to have people opt into the list. So that was the first big shift. And the end result of that shift was a lot of companies that were US based that had subsidiaries in the EU, they killed their EU subsidiaries because the time that it would take to rebuild that list wasn't economically feasible for them. Okay. And then in the US, we have a series of laws that are starting to go on right now at the individual state levels, where each state now has separate privacy requirements that are somewhat aligned with GDPR. They're not as restrictive, but it leads to a lot of confusion in terms of what's happening. And so as a result of these and kind of moving along towards this concept that consumers want to have privacy, iOS, the Apple operating system, made a series of changes. First off, that stopped it, that apps could not track process how people were progressing across the web. And now, as you have opted into the new iOS, it asks you, do you want to allow this app to track you? And what we found is that most people opted out of that. They did not want that. They didn't know what was going on in the first place. So that was the first big shift. The second big shift that's actually been going on for a couple of years is that Chrome, the largest browser in aggregate across all over the world, probably about 65%, has announced that they're going to be removing third-party cookies. Now, this is supposed to have happened several years in a row. It was supposed to happen already. They've delayed it once again till next year. But essentially what that means is that the way that advertising technology has worked since the beginning, since the mid-2000s, has been on this concept that when someone comes to your website, it's a first-party cookie. And what that means is that if your website is thenewyorktimes.com, it sets a little piece of code that only the New York Times can read and write to. And so when you come back again, and the first-party cookies are the things that when you go to Amazon or some site, you're automatically logged in. They know who you are. You're authenticated. A third-party cookie is when you go to the New York Times and there's ads that are there that aren't from the New York Times. They're from DoubleClick or from some other ad server, and they write their own cookie. And what that allows them to do is that when you go from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal, they know that you just saw that ad, and that allows them to control for things like frequency. And at my former company, we would also have a tag that would ride piggyback in the ads, and we would set our own first-party cookie. And what that meant is that when someone went through and would make a purchase or fill out a lead form or download an app, afterwards, we would be able to connect all of those first and third-party cookies and stitch them together. So we had a very accurate time and date stamped trail of every single ad this person was exposed to and every single click that they did across all of the advertisers' advertising. And then from that, we could look at things from a deterministic manner in terms of what was actually going on. And so what's happened now is because of this privacy and all of these changes, those third-party cookies are going away. They've been gone for a very long time in mobile Safari, but soon they will be going away in Chrome, and they've been gone from Firefox for a while as well too. So this is a foundational shift to how advertising technology works. And we know more than anything else that companies can start off as one thing like Netflix, and then before you know it, advertising has to come in. Advertising is addictive to any publicly traded company because it
Yeah.
generates significant amount of revenue. But this shift has been quite seismic in terms of of what's occurring across all of these companies.
So when you've looked at financial services and fintech firms and broadly startups, how much of them, as you said, a lot of them don't know where their dollar spend is going when they, hire a DoubleClick or whoever, or Engage, and we use that phrase, or hire a marketing agency to do their marketing and advertisement. What do you feel is changing for them now in terms of how much control can they get back in terms of targeting their clients, given all these new rules that are coming in, and building on from where you were speaking about how these changes are going to impact them? The question now is, what do they do? How do they do this, right? And what is and a build up to that would be, what would be the expected, if at all, change in cost of customer acquisition through advertisements?
Yeah, so what ends up happening for fintech firms when they go through the customer acquisition process is they first put together their ad tech stack, if you
Yeah.
will. They've got landing pages and stuff like that. They've got their app that's going to be downloaded, and then they start hiring a marketing agency, and then they're tracking things. But it's typically on a last click basis. It's the last action. And where it makes most sense in the beginning for them to advertise to look for customers is they say, there's a whole group of people that are already looking for our category, and those people are searching. So they tend to be in Google search is typically where they are. And what we find that happens is that you start advertising there, and all of a sudden you start acquiring customers, and you're like, my God, this is great. It's just like we're fishing,
Sure.
and the fish are biting. It's absolutely amazing. The problem is that you're fishing in a pond that is an auction-based pond. And
Correct.
once you start going there and your competitors start going there, without anything else happening, the auction prices start to go up and your cost per acquisition start to rise. So we start to see is in the beginning with a lot of these firms is they start acquiring customers, but then all of a sudden their CAC, their cost of acquisition for a new customer, starts to
Yeah.
rise substantially. And they start to say, what do we need to do? And then, of course, they start to say, well, we just need more money. And so they throw in more money into this. But really the answer is that in that space where the
Hmm.
fish are biting, there's this concept of brand differentiation. You need the ones who win in that space are
Yeah.
the ones where the potential customer already recognizes you from someplace else. And that's why you want to also spend money on Meta, and you want to have videos there and have ads there to build up some brand recognition. So when they're ready to search, they recognize you. And then you can start to do things like CTV, where now you're recognized during a favorite television show or program, or you start to advertise on YouTube. So it's that upper funnel type stuff that allows folks to go through and acquire at that bottom of the funnel. But what we find is that in the beginning, when we start working with customers, not just in fintech, but across the realm, everyone is overinvested in Google search.
Yeah.
Everyone is fishing in that same pond to the point of ridiculous amount of overinvestment, to the point where that CFO is saying, does this really make sense? It just doesn't seem like the numbers can be as accurate as Google is saying they are. But the key is to build that upper part of the funnel. That's why we're starting to see a lot of the larger multinational brands, especially in financial services as well, have cut their bottom of the funnel marketing and are moving more towards branding at the upper funnel. Even companies that are not in this space, like Airbnb, where you would think it would make sense to advertise lower funnel, they've stopped all of that, and it's all branding now. Because using platforms like a Provalytics, you can accurately measure the impact of branding. with the idea of branding is there's no offer. It just says, hey, we're here. Check us out. Whatever that message is. And
Okay.
you can connect those impressions that those ads that are out there all the way through to sales, which is the best part about this. So what I would say is that for fintech companies, when you're starting to think about your ad tech stack as you're building it out and you're building out your marketing department, you want to think about measurement. Measurement is a key component to your marketing. You need to plan that you're going to spend between 1 to 2% of all of your marketing dollars on measuring the effectiveness of your dollars. This will keep you in line with your CFO. And those dollars, those numbers, that 1 to 2%, you need to think about in terms of having an in-house analytics team. And you
Yeah.
also need to think in terms of having a separate neutral platform like a Provalytics or others that is doing all of the math, because there's the math and then there's the interpretation and then there's the making sense of it internally for your company. And as you grow, you're going to want to have someone in-house that does it for you.
Now, it's interesting when you talk about measuring as well as changing the approach from the bottom of the funnel all the way up to branding, right? So you're going from impressions as is a key metrics that a lot of advertising platforms try to push on you, saying X number of impressions, right? And the cost of which can be significantly different. And as a classic example, when we do use advertisement or marketing for our blog, I can see a remarkably high difference in a YouTube impression, cost per impression versus something like LinkedIn, right? And effectiveness is probably going to be a lot more on YouTube, where you're going to end up with more number of views for the same amount of dollars. But what I wanted to touch upon is a lot of the last, say, 8, 9, 10 years since the growth of and the strengthening of social media and prevalence in our day-to-day lives, both professionally and personally, marketing teams have been built to cater to their requirements largely through these uh, you know click ads, right? And not rather on the brand. It's more on impressions and the Google search kind of approach. So when we're looking at this change in approach, do you see a need for a new type of talent, or do you believe that there is enough in the existing marketing teams for them to be able to change their approach and be able to refocus themselves? Because it can almost be looked at, as you said, you're going back to something which is 15, 20 years old, or strategy that was used that long ago. So how do we, as a marketing team, or firms who have marketing teams, how should they be looking to fill those seats or change those seats, as it were?
You bring up an excellent point, because we have now, as you stated, a whole generation of marketers that are hyper focused on, frankly, a way of doing business that is going away.
Yeah,
And the biggest problem is that their perspective on how marketing works is that you invest marketing dollars to buy clicks, and clicks lead to installs, or clicks lead to sales,
right.
or they lead to leads. Whereas the reality of how marketing works is that we invest dollars to buy impressions. Those impressions build awareness. Awareness leads people to install, download, or leads, and that's what leads to sales. And so it's a great correlation that you made, because the new generation of folks who live and breathe on LinkedIn or social media, everyone in that space understands the value of an impression. It's all
Yeah,
about views, it's about impressions. And so though that attitude is the attitude that's needed. In fact, you could walk into any marketing team today and all of them have a Google sheet that tracks day by day total sales, how much money they've spent across each platform, and how many
yeah,
clicks they've received. And in there, they calculate cost per click, click-through rate, but there's no column for impressions,
yeah,
because today's marketer is not interested in impressions, or only interested in clicks. And I say to marketers today, and if you're listening and watching this and you've got that Google sheet, go add a column to it right now for impressions. And you want to go back because, as you very well know, you can generate a lot of views on a video today and not have any traffic to your website from it, not have any
Correct.
leads come in. But a week or two later, all of a sudden, people start to show up. And if you weren't tracking impressions, you would have no idea where those people came from. And that's why most marketers today, they see their business comes from organic. They just show up. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you have your own store, don't you want to know how people just knew to show up? It's not
Correct.
everybody is word of mouth. You're doing advertising, you want to know. So you hit on something really important, which is marketers today, they really need to kind of go through a foundational training, if you will, of
Yeah.
a new way of looking at things. And I think part of this is that these marketers are so freaked out about what's coming because they've been they've had their heads have been down and they don't have a larger, bigger perspective. In fact, at our company, we actually put together an entire certification course, an attribution
Okay.
certification that tracks the whole history of marketing from the beginning of digital all the way through. It even talks about things like what is a UTM? Like every marketer knows what a UTM code is because it's part of Google Analytics. But
Yeah.
most people don't know it's back from the old code from a company that Google acquired that became Google Analytics. So we track all of that stuff and we put this out there as a free course. It's actually on our website, available for no cost. And there's even a certificate people can put on LinkedIn. But what we've found for marketers is that it opens their eyes, strengthens their foundation, and lets them kind of look ahead and understand the importance primarily of impressions, of
Yeah.
views, and understand how to really approach the future moving forward.
And I'm going to build on top of that and bring a demographic which is seems to be at the face of it quite different in the way they interact with each other and the other generations, the Gen Z conversation, right? And I'm probably am stereotyping here, but broadly, they're very, yes, they are digital natives. They are very savvy with understanding technology, but there's also a very different culture or subculture being built up in their social interaction, right? Forgetting all the words and the new terminologies and the rits and all of that stuff, how they slay. But the question here being, when a lot of these marketing teams are being led by millennials or Gen Z, or Gen X, how can they connect to this Gen Z environment? Have you, in your experience, and especially in the recent, seen any significant changes in terms of how one could more effectively target the Gen Z, and what kind of analytics are you seeing with regards to Gen Z?
Yeah, it's interesting because what most marketing teams have done is they look and they see what's out there. And we saw this with the last couple of Super Bowls, which are they do these very fast TikTok style ads because
Yeah.
they figure, well, that's what people are watching, that's what is capturing attention. But the reality is that at the end of the day, there's there's a couple of basics of advertising, regardless of what generation you're trying to reach, that have always held true. More than anything else, in order to build awareness, you have to capture attention. And the only way to capture attention is you have to make an emotional connection.
Sure.
So the challenge today is you have to make that emotional connection or put that hook in a very short period of time. Um, but the ads that are delivering, the ads that are working the best are the ones that are telling stories.
Okay.
There's not enough storytelling that's going on. It's almost as though the creatives, if you will, the people who have told stories in the past have all left the building or they've all retired. They're not there. And it's all about, hey, let me show you this product real fast and we're going to chop it up. I'm going to show it with
Mm.
a red highlight, a yellow highlight. Here you go, buy now.
Yeah.
Well, there's only so much a buy now that people can take, regardless of their age group. But every generation loves stories.
Stories.
So it's the storytellers that will always win. And because stories have emotion, and emotion connects. And that's what gets people to stop and notice. And that's how you build awareness for a brand.
Yeah, I think, as they say, a picture tells a thousand stories in some senses. And you can now see with the meme generation, there's a lot more going on in that one picture to be able to tell a short story. And that could be a way. I want to kind of close with a couple of questions around how the Web3 world generally interacts, right? So we see a lot of individuals as well as companies in the Web3 world operating through Telegram or Discord, as it were. So messaging apps, in particular Telegram and Discord, being very, very popular, and a lot of airdrops, etc., through Twitter. So that whole world of advertisement is almost off the traditional, and I can't believe I'm saying, is the traditional big tech players, right? It's not on Facebook, it's not Instagram, it's not TikTok, it's not Google. So have you encountered a lot of the Web3 marketing world, especially through, as I mentioned, through the social messaging apps? And if how could that be used for targeting the Gen Z better, in your opinion?
Well, you have to go where your people are. And when all of these iOS changes occurred, every marketer saw that their Facebook and Instagram, their meta performance dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
And it was because Meta wasn't getting the signals anymore. So what we saw is we saw a lot of marketers who started moving money out of Meta.
Yeah.
But the reality is those same people that were always on Meta are still there. So in the US, if you want to target women over the age of 40, you better be on Meta. It's just a fact. That woman is and her husband will be on Meta until they're in their 70s or 80s. And that's where they're going to live. They're not going to move over to Telegram or anything else. So you have to be where your demographic is. So if you're selling to Gen Z, you have to be where they are, and you have to start thinking about marketing campaigns that are there. So for example, like Reddit recently has just started to explode because it is a very frequently used kind of new style search engine, if you will.
Yeah.
And very soon we have OpenAI, which is starting to do all these deals. Within a year or so, we're going to have advertising that's going to be integrated in there as well too. So you have to start to, and that's where it comes down to, where when you're selling a product or a service, if you're selling it to 18 to 34-year-old men, you want to start to think about where are they at, what platforms are they on, what social media are they utilizing, and how can you get your advertising messages to there. Now, in some instances, like for example, here in the US, one of the more popular apps for men in that age demographic are the like DraftKings, for example.
Sure,
And
sports space, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And in the early days when they were growing, because we did part of their measurement, they were spending as much money as they could. They were trying to find every place that these people were. And there were some places where they couldn't find them. And so they actually went, because at the time there was no, like on TV, there were all these sports programs, but there were no programs that dealt around fantasy football and fantasy baseball and things like that. So they actually went to the TV networks and said, I want you to create a fantasy football TV show. We'll pay for it. And so in that instance, that's an example of where they knew their audience would be there watching sports, but there was no place, there was no specific program for them, and there's no way for them to advertise. So they had to create the content, if you will. So you have to start to understand, where's your demographic living. If they're living in Telegram, you need to start thinking creatively, see what other folks are doing, and then even go to Telegram directly and say, hey, I want to create something here that's unique and different, and we'll pay for it, like they did at DraftKings. That's really what it comes down to, is starting to be innovative around the platform that you're with, and understand that these platforms, at the end of the day, they're always looking to make money, and advertising is a great way for them. You just have to be innovative.
Yeah, and especially when they don't charge the users, they need the advertising dollars to sustain themselves, right? I'm going to close with one question which is on everybody's mind, and you briefly touched upon, which is AI, right? And the world of Gen AI, as it were, with large language models. Um, Actually, maybe a two split question because I have this thing gnawing on me for many years. A is when we're looking at the Gen AI conversation, there are a lot of inherent biases that exist in the underlying data, right? So, in your opinion, for marketing, etc., do you feel that the Gen AI outputs that are coming or being created could potentially be free of these biases or at least be neutral in some senses? That's the first part of the question. The second question is, do you see a lot of these Gen AI applications or Gen AI powered embedded applications replacing marketing talent, right? Because you'd have one person using one or two different Gen AI tools. It could be OpenAI on one side, it could be Genesis on the other, or Gemini on the other, and they may not need as many people. So, do you see that as a possibility? So, yeah, two-part to close this.
So the first question in terms of bias, at the end of the day, these models all have to be built initially by people.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be bias. And then you could say, well, eventually the model itself could build another model. But if that model has inherent bias in it, it's going to follow through. So
yeah,
we use AI in our model, and our bias that we have built into our model is very simple. We believe that advertising works. That's our bias.
okay.
So to be completely unbiased, we'd say, well, advertising may not work all the time, but our bias is it does work. In terms of the applications, Google and Facebook are trying that right now, where they essentially say, give me money, trust us, we will find your customers for you, and we will do it in a way that'll save you money. But the problem with that, and this gets going back to the bias question, is let's say there's two paths to acquire a customer, path A and path B. Path A is going to cost the advertiser an extra dollar than path B.
Sure.
Well, Google's bias is, as a publicly traded company, should be to squeeze out as much profit as they possibly can. And so their bias is they have a fiduciary duty to take path A, which ends up costing the advertiser a dollar more. And for me as an advertiser, if there's a way for me to save money by having human intervention, I'll do path B.
Okay.
I have not yet seen some of the creatives that I've seen that these are generated, but remember they're being prompted by humans at this point, has been absolutely amazing. But we're still not at the point yet where it has reached a level that is similar. It's acting like a human,
Okay.
but it's not quite there. And going back to that question earlier about how do you capture the attention of Gen Z, and we talk about emotion and we talk about creativity. The concept about being creative is a uniquely human aspect. I think we will do a very good job with AI of it simulating human. I think we'll have difficulty telling if it was created by a human or not. But at the end of the day, it's one of the things that makes us different is our ability to create. And it's unique. And when you talk to artists and you talk to creative people and you see someone who's painting, they will tell you that they didn't create it. They saw it inside. And they're painting what they saw, what a picture that was, you could say, was sent to them. And most artists and most creative people, they have notebooks and they get their ideas in between sleep and awake. So this creativity comes from some other place inside of our brains and minds that I don't think AI will ever get there. To us, it'll appear like it's there, but I think it'll still be missing that uniquely human aspect.
Yeah, maybe as an analogy, it would be the ability to duplicate a Mona Lisa, but not be able to create a Mona Lisa, if I were to put it that way, right? Yeah.
That's very well said.
Fair enough. Jeff, this has been very enlightening for me to understand about the marketing analytical world, and as well as just building the story around how you can do marketing. Your knowledge shines through throughout the conversation. We at Finstep Asia are very delighted to have had you here. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for more interesting and deep insights in the world of Web3 FinTech with thought leaders like Jeff. Click like, subscribe, and share with your fellows to understand more about the industry. Thank you so much.